Hello, everyone, and welcome to Walking Through the Bible. Thus far in the book, Job has been answering and refuting his friend's theory that he is suffering because of his sin. But time to time, he has been refuting it with a theology that is incorrect, which is that suffering happens to everyone because God causes it to happen to everyone. In other words, it didn't matter if you were righteous or wicked. It simply mattered if God desired you to suffer. Now, Job never charged God with wrong, for he correctly stated that God could do as he pleased, but in his case, he desired that God end his suffering by letting him die. In the final chapter of Job's speeches, Job is going to be defending his righteousness, while at the same time desiring that God judge him fairly. Punish him if he is wicked, with the implication being that he should not be punished if he is righteous. Let's see how he makes this argument. So if you have a Bible with you, turn to the book of Job, chapter 31. We're going to be reading from verses 1 through 12. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So, Job chapter 31, beginning at verse 1. I have made a covenant with my eyes. Why then should I look upon a young woman? For what is the allotment of God from above, and the inheritance of the Almighty from on high? Is it not destruction for the wicked, and disaster for the workers of iniquity? Does he not see my ways and count all my steps? If I have walked with falsehood, or if my foot has hastened to deceit, let me be weighed on honest scales, that God may know my integrity. If my step has turned from the way, or my heart walked after my eyes, or if any spot adheres to my hands, then let me sow and another eat. Yes, let my harvest be rooted out. If my heart has been enticed by a woman, or if I have lurked at my neighbor's door, then let my wife grind for another, and let others bow down over her. For that would be wickedness. Yes, it would be iniquity deserving of judgment. For that would be a fire that consumes to destruction, and would root out all my increase. Job begins this chapter by noting his morality, a covenant made with himself, evidently from his youth, not to look upon a woman to lust after her. The issue of lust is one that men and women face equally. The old adage that men lust after women more than women lust after men, I believe, is false, and rooted in the idea that the sex drive of men is stronger, or at least harder to control, than that of a woman. And yet, where is the scripture that would say that? Just because the scriptures focus so much on male characters, because they are leaders of the family and religious life, and as such, we read more of their moral failings as it concerns women, that women didn't have the same moral failings? I am thinking specifically of Lot's daughters, as well as the many female harlots mentioned in Scripture. These women seem to enjoy sex just as men do. And so to think that males have a harder time controlling themselves because we're more prone to lust is just plain wrong. The key difference is that often men simply lust after women in a more overt way, while women tend to be more subtle. Both sexes need to guard against lust, for such is condemned by Jesus in places like Matthew 5:28, and by the Apostle Peter in places like 2 Peter 2:14. If Job had acted this way and not made this covenant to act morally, what should he expect from God? Punishment. It's not that Job is taking on the arguments of his friends by saying that only the wicked suffer. Rather, he is saying that God is justified in punishing the wicked for their deeds, for they should be reaping what they sow. Job's implication in all of this is that God shouldn't be punishing him because he is righteous. And in this, Job's theology again falls short by ascribing to God the suffering of the righteous and asserting that suffering should not happen to the righteous because that would be unfair of God to cause this. Job is not suffering because God caused it, but because Satan caused it. God allowed it to happen as a test of Job's faith, but God allowed it, placing restrictions on Satan as to what could be done. But that Job was willing to accept punishment for his sins, had he been in sin, was good, for we all need to accept responsibility for our actions. Job goes on to say that God knows his steps. He knows that Job is righteous, for Job has not walked in falsehoods, telling lies to others or being deceitful. God knows that Job had not turned from the way that he should walk, nor has he broken his covenant to be enticed by another woman, for had he done so, not only would he have been wicked, He'd even go so far as to say that if it were not true, he would allow God to cause him to suffer the greatest humiliation of having his wife become a slave. Now, saying this was foolish on Job's part, even if true, for why would you ever put your wife up for auction as were in this way? She was to be your helper, not your property. But that's how confident Job was in his own integrity. Job was calling God to judge him on an honest scale, a scale that would tell the truth and wasn't weighted either for or against Job. And he was confident that if God did so, God would declare him righteous, unlike his friend said, thus vindicating them and even hopefully causing God to end his suffering by allowing him to die. But Job is not done. He will continue on further in chapter 31, so we invite you back for the next lesson when we will discuss what Job said further. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Job chapter 31, verses 13 to 28, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. We thank you for watching Walking Through the Bible today. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave them below. But if you like this video, we ask that you consider subscribing to our channel so you won't miss out on other videos in our series, as well as share this video among your friends so that the saving message of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.